Do you feel like how political these races are getting, and even how politicized the federal bench is getting, do you feel like that's leading people into an area where it is they're violating that right now through these campaigns by saying, uh, this is what we stand for, this is what our opponents stand for? Do you feel like they're violating that oath in the process of this campaign?
Well, Patricia, I think there are regulatory bodies that monitor those kinds of things and kind of have jurisdiction over those violations. I will let those bodies handle that thing. But what I'll say is I take those rules so seriously that when I told a good friend last night that I was coming on to do the show this morning, she said, "Oh, what podcast are you doing?" I said, "Politically Georgia." And she recoiled. I mean, her face cracked up. She said, "You can't do that. It says political."
Yes.
And I said, "Look, I'm so glad that you know me well enough to know I take my oath so seriously that that's your reaction, right? Even my closest friends know that I just don't do politics." And I explained to her that part of the reason I'm coming on is I feel strongly that I want to push back on that idea and to explain to people why the judicial branch isn't political.
Let me ask you this, because Justice Bethel was on a couple of days ago and asked him a similar question, but we've talked about how Democrats are going all in for the two challengers against you and Justice Bethel. But how is it different in your race, from Governor Kemp holding a fundraiser for you, or from other well-known popular conservatives endorsing your campaign?
It's a fair question. And first, let me say that, if you look at my disclosures, these very public documents that we file on a regular basis, you're going to see extremely broad bipartisan support, Democrats, Republicans, people all over our state, trial lawyers, criminal defense lawyers, civil lawyers, all over the state, 159 counties. That's been true since I've been on the bench in 2018, my 2020 contested race, and it's true now. But the bipartisanship is important, and I don't think it is fair to sort of equate the chief executive of the state offering support when what I'm doing is going out and trying to get the endorsement through the vote of every single Georgian. I'm not speaking to one political party. I'm speaking to all political parties and people who do not affiliate with a political party. So I appreciate our chief executive, our governor's support, but I want support from all Georgians.
So, because you can't talk about issues specifically, I think it would be helpful for our audience to understand a little bit more about your background, how you came to this position in the first place, and even why you want to be a judge, why you want to be reelected.
Thank you for asking that. And I always feel weird answering this question because I think there are a lot of people who, like, their life's dream is to become a judge. Mm-hmm. That was not my life's dream. It turns out I love the job, and I want to keep the job, and I'm going to fight very hard to keep the job. But I feel like I was called to this job because of the service that I began with the state more than 10 years ago. So, I grew up in Atlanta. I went away for school to Duke, and then I practiced law in D.C. for a number of years, I did some plaintiff side litigation, some civil defense litigation. But what brought me home was the water wars case. And I'm sure you guys have covered the water wars over time.
20 years.
So there are decades of water wars. But the most recent victory for us was in the case in the United States Supreme Court when Florida had sued Georgia. So I was originally outside counsel in that case from D.C., but I was coming home all the time to Atlanta to interview witnesses and do the litigation and do discovery. I realized I wanted to be home. And so my husband and I moved home with our small child. At that time, we only had one, and now we have three. And I began working in the Attorney General's office, first on water and then on appellate litigation and complex civil litigation. But when you spend time working for the state and you realize how many amazing people do that, sacrifice lucrative jobs to come work for their state, and the good that they're doing, and just how functional our state government is, sometimes even compared to the federal government, I wanted to play a role in that. And so I started as Solicitor General, eventually got appointed to the bench in 2018, but had to really be encouraged to do it. And the reason was I loved being a lawyer. I loved being an advocate. And I knew that if I made that transition from being an advocate in court to a judge, I had to live a very different life. I had to restrict myself from any number of activities. You have to be the person in the corner at the party, sort of, as I said to y'all before, smiling and nodding while everyone else is talking about what's on the cover of the AJC. I don't get to have those conversations because so many of those issues come to our court.